So once again, I protest what's going down at this branch. I tell them again, look, it sounds like a little bit like negligence on your side. You must have processes in place to prevent this. You must. And you know what? This sounds a little bit like international fraud. Somebody pipes up in the audience there and in front of me and says, well, why'd you say that? Well, it's quite simple. Now, I already learned prior to this video that this check was actually a stolen check from the Wyndham Group. Now, the Wyndham Group is the largest hotel chain owners in the world, and their head office is in New Jersey, USA. This check was stolen from them and found its way to Canada. Now, so what we have is an American company involved, an American bank involved, a Canadian company involved, a Canadian bank involved, a Dubai bank involved, and obviously some other people in Calgary involved. And that's international fraud, it looks like it to me. Well, the Scotia Bank denied it. So then I said, well, we should probably get the police involved. And then the Scotia Bank, actually India, turns around and he says, well, you know, you're quite welcome to do that, but we're not going to do it. They didn't want any part of it. They did not want to call the police. And they refused to accept it as international fraud. Oh. Well, sitting in that chair at that moment, I once again realized what these guys were doing. Now, if they'd admitted some form of funny business going on at that branch, i.e. fraud or whatever else is going on, and call the police, then that is an admittance that you've done something wrong at that branch. Now, they just told me they deposited a fraudulent check. That in itself is wrong. So if the bank doesn't complain, then it becomes a complaint between me and the bank, not me and the law enforcement and trying to fix this. That's what went down. At the end of the day, I minus $100,000 and there's nothing that I could do about it. So sitting there, I realize that I'm in trouble. I've done nothing wrong and the bank is twisting this around. And they're all looking at me. And Linda once again says, so when do you think you'll have these funds corrected? And once again, I'm protesting. I'm deflated. I'm nervous. I'm flabbergasted. And I tell Linda, I need to get out of here. I need to try and get my head around what you've just told me. And I think this is totally unfair. I've done nothing wrong. You guys created the cause and effect for me. And then before I left, Inda turned around and said, well, we believe that you sent that wire transfer knowingly, that you knew you didn't have sufficient funds to cover that wire transfer. And I said, Inda, in the years I've been at this bank, we don't have overdraft protection, never did. And you're telling me that I can do a wire transfer and make my bank account tens of thousands of dollars minus, and you'd let me complete that wire transfer. Absolute garbage, Inda. You know and I know that's not true. And I don't know what path you're going down by suggesting something like that. Now, let me tell you something else. You're saying that money wasn't in my account. I actually have a statement to say the opposite. The statement came yesterday. And on that note, I told everybody I'm going to leave and I'll get back with them tomorrow. I go back to my office. As I just told you, it's 3 minutes away. I walk in. My staff's surprised to see me. And after a few minutes, my chief engineer comes up and he tells me that there's a problem with the payroll. Oh, now I got more problems. What sort of problems? And he tells me that the Scotia Bank went into their TD account and cancelled a couple of months of paychecks. I was flabbergasted that that process could take place. First of all, it has nothing to do with my employees. And how is it possible that the Scotia Bank can go retroactive into people's bank accounts and withdraw money. I was really, really concerned about that. And I thought it was absolutely terrible for my staff. The next day, I actually get up and I go to, shall we say, a loan shark. And I borrowed money that day from this person against my house, used my house as collateral to pay back my employees, because this has nothing to do with them, right? That's the least I could do. So at that time, I have a friend that used to be a manager at the Scotia Bank. So he knows all what goes on inside these banks. So I called him about my situation. And after a few minutes, he said, if I didn't know you, he said, I wouldn't believe what you just told me. He said, it can't happen. And the only way, in his opinion, he said it could happen is if there's some sort of collaboration and fraud, some funny business going on at that bank. And I agreed, there obviously is. And then he tells me about this international money laundering detection process. And he said every day, he said, we have this at the banks, the exceptional daily transaction report. Now what that does, it's an electronic printout of all the accounts at the bank. And if that account has an anomaly, as in sudden high value activity, it gets printed out on a report. Now that manager will allocate the appropriate account to the business manager of that account. Now that person is supposed to contact the owner of the account and talk about this money. And in the meantime, if they think it's funny, they'll hang on to that money. Now what he was alluding to was that my name would have been on that list. There would have been a printout that day when that money came into my account. And that person should have signed off on it. Now that list will have the signature of the person that signed off. Now that's the person you need to talk to. Okay, so I got some new information. No problem. Next day I go to the bank. Inda's there again, as well as some of the other people that were there the other day. And the first thing I ask is the details of how the bank can go into people's bank accounts and take out money, retroactive. Yeah, so I asked the crowd, how can they do that? And then the lady manager pipes up and she said, well, 10 years ago when you signed up your account here, we gave you a red booklet. And that red booklet has all the terms and conditions. Now that red booklet is actually your contract. It's not just an info sheet. It's a contract between you and your bank. And you should both agree to it. Now, in that booklet, the booklet says that in the case of fraudulent checks being deposited in the account, you're on the hook for that fraudulent check. That's what she said. And they can go back 90 days to get the money back. What that booklet actually said was that when a person deposits that fraudulent check, that person is on the hook for the actions of that check. That's what it says. Now, to interpret that, I never saw the check, the bank handled the check, and without my say-so, they deposited that check and failed to say anything to me about it. And at the same time, their business manager, Teresa, failed to tell me, for whatever reason, I don't know to this day, why I wasn't informed that this was not a wire transfer, but a check. That's what went down. So I got the message, okay, well, it's too late to do anything. I've already paid my staff back. And then I go on to the topic about the exceptional daily transaction report, and I'd like a copy of it. And once again, this lady manager pipes up and says, I don't know what document you're talking about. I've never heard of such a thing. I leaned across the desk and I said, well, I can assure you 100% I know that this document exists, and I can, with authority, a friend of mine that used to be a manager at the Scotia Bank will verify that this document does exist. So then this lady in the next breath said, well, that document has too much information on it. I'm not going to show you that. So here we go. 5 seconds ago, she said she knows nothing about it. She lied to me and in front of everybody else that was present and said that document didn't exist, only to admit that it does exist and you're not getting it. She said there was too much info on it. I said, well, black out what's not pertinent and give me what is pertinent. They refused. I never did get that document from the bank. Once again, Inder pipes up and he said, so how are you going to, make these funds correct in your bank account, these negative funds? And I said, Inder, I've done nothing wrong. I think you guys are on the hook for this. You've already told me you deposited a fraudulent check, and according to your terms and conditions, that booklet says that you are on the hook for it. You failed to tell me that this check existed, and I believe that you have processes in place at this branch so that such processes would stop any funny business going on, i.e. the deposit of high-value checks by another person and not say anything. I had no prearrangement for this type of service at your bank. 10 years here. Now, another thing, Inder, I'm 3 minutes down the road and everybody knows that. I've been here 10 years. I've never had a check mailed to this bank. Hello, ding-a-ling, didn't that ring something in the brains here of the people at this bank? Well, I guess not, eh? So I tell the bank that I probably need to get some legal advice. The bank is already refusing to give me any evidence so I can take to the police. They don't want to give me nothing, and they're saying nothing. So I tell them I need to contact a lawyer, a barrister. They say, go ahead. That's what I do. I contact the barrister. I meet with him, tell the barrister the story, and the barrister quickly says, oh, sounds like a definite case of gross negligence. Well, that's nice to know. So what's the next step? The next thing he asked me, he said, so do you have the wherewithal to do this? You know, you're taking on a giant, and it's 2 to 3 years out of your life. Well, I sit back for a moment. Well, I can handle that, 2, 3 years. You got to defend yourself, right? And I am out $100,000. They took $100,000 from me at the end of the day. I can handle that. And then he said, you are taking on a giant. These banks have very deep pockets and likely lots of legal people. They'll stretch it out, and hopefully they'll stretch it out long enough till you run out of money. That's kind of corporate strategy these days. Okay. I guess big business does do that. I actually witnessed it one time in Calgary. And then he said, so we need to talk about the financial side, the cost. Do you have the wherewithal to see this through to the end? So how much are we talking about then? He said, likely between $120,000 to $200,000. I know how these cases go with these banks. They are expensive and time consuming. Wow, that's a lot of money, I'm thinking. And then he said, so here's the bad news. I'm already thinking I got the bad news. And then he said, in Alberta, Canada, this is a civil suit, right? And he said, in a civil suit, it is most unlikely you would be awarded your legal fees even if you win the case. And then he said, you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And I feel sorry for your situation, but that's the way it is. So on that advice, I already quickly came to the conclusion that